Welcome to another edition of Gov Tech Today. I'm Russell Lowery.
And I'm Jen Saha.
And together we're going to try and bridge the gap between .com and .gov. Today we're teeing up a conversation where we talk about laws, rules, and regulations and what happens at the federal level, internationally, 50 different states, localities in California. How can business navigate this complex web from the private sector community, from the .com community? What are you seeing some areas where there's divergent regulation that's causing headaches or problems?
I mean, privacy is a great example, and we've talked about it on the show before on what California is doing in this arena. But the feds also have a privacy rule, a privacy law going into effect. You have GDPR over in Europe that many people are adopting. And then we're seeing each and every state adopt something that maybe looks like California's, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's stricter than California's, or maybe it's a little looser. Maybe their legislature is politically, more inclined to accept something that's a little lower standards on the privacy side. So, I mean, for instance, the Electronic Privacy Information Center did a survey this last year, and, they're all over the place as far as the grades they would give people for their state consumer privacy grades. California, you'll be pleased to know, got a B. No state got an A, but there are even states with Fs for fails. So if I'm a business and I'm working on complying with all of these rules and regulations, my head is just spinning. I have to at least figure out 50 different states and what each and every one of them is doing to protect privacy of their citizens. And state boundaries are not, a wall where internet stops or a hacker won't go into this state. It's, everything is very fluid. We live in a global economy these days. So my question is sort of why are we doing this? If we just pump the brakes, if we look to the feds, we say federally we should do something, even internationally, why doesn't everybody just do GDPR? That would make our lives as business people so much easier. But why do we do it the way we do it, which is sort of all over the place?
Awesome question. I think I often provide strategic counsel to clients, and you look for a venue where you can fight and win is part of it. So I definitely understand that oftentimes the business community can be behind why there's some confusion in the marketplace, and different businesses that appear very similar on the outside can have totally different business models and be impacted in different ways. And sometimes actors in the political process are not looking for the best possible policy outcome, but the one that gives them a business advantage. And sometimes you want a heavy-handed regulation, and sometimes you want a light-handed regulation. Sometimes you do a lot of business in one area of the state or a particular niche market in a particular part of the country. And that can drive the business imperative to push for a particular regulation or tweak. So you oftentimes say you have finance and financial regulation that's driven by New York, and then you have tech and AI and some of the privacy stuff that's written in California. Air quality is another one where you see a lot of California-driven legislation. So different legislative strategies, different business strategies, and different looking for a venue that's most hospitable to whatever particular interest you're trying to pursue all play into those decisions.
I think it's going to become really relevant, and we're in the middle of it right now with AI, generative AI, and how we're regulating that as a state, but nationally as well. And if I'm, an up-and-coming AI company, again, I'm getting that head spinning because it's California is going to set these rules, and I'll have to make sure I comply there. But Washington may have different rules, and Vermont's making their own rules. And then the feds have these rules. And does that supersede these other rules, or do the states run it? And where am I headquartered? And is that the rules I follow, or do I have, so it's incredibly confusing and oftentimes frustrating from a business standpoint, even back to lobbyist registrations, right? In the state of California, you have to register if you do A, B, and C. But if you go to LA County, the rules are different. You have to register if you're doing C and D. Even in our functions as consultants and government advocates, it's confusing, right? Wherever I am, there's a new set of rules to follow.
Well, for the advocacy and lobbying, our ethos is you're just going to follow the rules and tell me what it is. The move fast and break things in the tech world just doesn't work for our business. But I see that as part of what's happening in the regulatory world on AI. I think a lot of people are not worrying about the rules and regulations right now. They're figuring out how to get to market and how to move fast, and they'll figure out the regulatory tweaks later. And there's some interesting videos. I may link to one in the show notes. But if you think about regulatory capture, and if you have the power to shape the regulation and mold it to your business interest, there are a lot of startups who are working in the AI space that are building products that we can barely even imagine. And there are massive players in the space. I don't think I need to name them, but everyone knows ChatGPT or Gemini, these massive tech players. And the question becomes, do they really want small competition, or would you rather have a tightly regulated, expensive to implement regulation that kept competitors out? I'm not accusing any particular company of adopting that strategy, but strict regulation that's expensive to comply with or difficult technologically, when you have war chests that are billions and billions of dollars every month, it's easier for those companies to comply with those regulations than it is for the startups. And so regulators in California have a tough job of navigating and trying to thread that needle and making sure their pursuit of the public interest is not actually serving the business interest of one of these conglomerates or one of these large players that may or may not represent the public interest.
So you used a great example on climate and emissions as it relates to vehicles. And that was a really good example, I think, and I'm interested in your take on it, of California putting something into place and then the feds actually following, but mirroring that pretty much exact policy.
Yeah, and it's sort of market driven, but when California is such a large market for vehicle emissions, and they pass a rule that says if you're going to sell a vehicle in California, it has to have certain emissions requirements. This really happened. Well, every car dealer could have a California-only emission vehicle, but that's really inefficient to do. And you don't want 50 different states because they won't make them. They're going to make them for their largest market. And in that sense, the federal government wound up following the California regulations. We're seeing that on truck emissions right now as California moves toward more electric vehicles, even banning the sale, I think it's in 2030, of new gas vehicles. You have a consortium of diesel truck manufacturers that are combining to build a battery factory in Southeast United States. Multi-billion-dollar investment driven by California environmental policy that's likely to shape the federal environmental policy. And I will often advise clients that sometimes you want to provoke a fight with California. And that might mean you're recruiting states like Texas and Florida to come up with a competing regulation so that your negotiation is at the federal level between competing state regulations. But oftentimes it pays to just compete here in California and shape the regulation so that you're getting a regulation you can live with nationwide.
So it's almost like California is doing the regulatory capture in itself, right? Like we're the tip of the sword that's sort of dealing with a lot of these issues, AI being another great example. We'll see. We'll see who goes to market first with solid governance and data issues and really rules and regs around the use of AI. I mean, a bunch of states are working on it. They're probably working, I hope they're working together, but my gut tells me they're probably working in somewhat of a siloed fashion. And the feds are working on it. There was an executive order out of the federal government to look at this and come up with some rules of the road. So where do you think we'll end up on the AI sort of journey of regulation?
Well, I think it looks thoughtful to me so far. So when I looked at the governor's executive order on AI, which most of our listeners have probably read, I noted how it mirrored the Biden language. He intentionally went to be on side with Biden and said, "This is how we're going to do it in California." And Europe, and this has been repeated across tech regulation, Europe usually takes the lead on consumer protection measures. And you see US corporations often paying huge fines for violating European regulations that they enforced for privacy protection or consumer protection. But the entities that wind up paying those fines over there are American corporations. And I think the approach to regulation explains why that is, because they grow big here, they dominate the world, and then they adjust to the regulation that comes in from Europe. And you'd hate to see that play out again, because it winds up benefiting those biggest companies that grow here, and then ultimately squeeze out the little guys who can't comply with the expensive regulation.
So I'm going to get a little political on this one, and we don't really do that too often on the pod, but how is it easier or more difficult when, say, you have a Democrat, a supermajority Democratic legislature, Democratic governor, Democratic president, versus if we had, say, a Republican president and we had that supermajority? I don't know, but it could happen, right? And how does that make things easier or more difficult?
I don't want to say it. I don't want to overstate it, and it'll sound ridiculous if I say it doesn't matter. It does. Who's leading matters. But in a very real way, and what might be encouraging for our listeners, we're able to have a lot of influence because I really believe that work flows to those who do it. And thinking through this deeply and putting words on a page and explaining why it matters, the lawyers and the institutional people that work in and out of government at the state and federal levels tend to be experts and have thought deeply about these things. And the number of people who can do that work tends to be small. And so if you can help people think through the issues, those are the ones who are deciding it. The elected officials set sort of direction and priorities, but on all of this, it's the details that matter. And oftentimes, if you're willing to put in the work to help shape the details, you can have a profound influence. I guarantee you that there is a regulatory lawyer in one of America's tech giants who's going to have a profound effect on the shape of AI regulation that a highly elected official who sets broad policy is not going to have an impact.
I love it. And you're totally right. It's those worker bees, those civil servants that just do what's right, that do what's good government. And to me, and I know to you too, good government isn't a political issue.
Right.
It's doing what's right for the right reasons. And
Yes.
that's what I love.
I can hear some of the skepticism in the audience. As people, if you have a cynical view of government and you think everyone is stupid and corrupt,
You're so wrong.
You're wrong,
Yeah.
and you're likely to get treated poorly. If you think people are stupid and you communicate that, you're not likely to get a reception. If you think people in government are stupid and incompetent, it might be because you're being shoved off to people who don't have time for you because you don't get to interact with the people who are really doing some really hard work. And so I can attest after 30 years of doing it, there's people that are working every day to do the right thing, to figure it out, and they're working with players inside and outside government who have that same problem solving perspective, and there's a way to do it. I'm curious on because I primarily stay in California. I haven't been to an out of state conference, maybe a couple in Vegas the last year, but you get all over the country and look at stuff that's happening in other states on stuff like, say, the privacy regulations. Are you seeing that multi-state, tough to implement rules blossoming? Because I haven't seen anything that looks dispositive for the nation yet.
I mean, definitely the level of intensity, the lobby in those given states, even the political, I know you said it doesn't matter. You're right. In most cases, it doesn't. But when you're passing a bill, those politics come into play, right? So red states tend to be a lot more relaxed with personal privacy and consumer protection than blue states. But it is kind of all over the map. I think what the nation is waiting for is for the feds to step up. There have been some starts and some stops back and forth in Congress, but I really think that will eventually drive towards what we're going to do as a nation on the privacy side of things. And the positive thing is that so far it looks a lot like California's. So we'll benefit from that, having been that tip of the spear.
So if you're familiar with the California regulation, it at least gives you a good starting point to engage with the more national conversation. It's pivoting around the California conversation, which is often the case in the regulatory world. Are there states who are doing innovative things that maybe we can point our California audience toward?
I think on the AI side of it would be really interesting to look at what some of these states are doing. A lot of them have pilots going already with like a chat GPT or, any kind of LLM where they're using it already and they're having some teams test it out in different departments and agencies. It becomes a balance, right? Of like, how much are we willing to open ourselves up to risk versus how much are we willing to use these tools to help our efficiencies. So there is a balance there, but I'm seeing some places like, Vermont is doing some really cool stuff. Maricopa County in Arizona is doing some great stuff. And I'm not just talking about chatbots. I'm talking about like really cool, innovative things that still have an element of human involvement. No decision goes out without some human touching it, but it's great. And, they have chief data officers. A lot of them have chief AI officers now. It's a whole new world for that kind of thing. So I think California could learn a lot from looking at what other states have done. In fact, I pulled contract language from that pilot that's happening in another state. It's in Pennsylvania, and Connecticut has one going too. And sent it to our guys in California that are working on this right now. Like, what are the terms and conditions for AI? Right. We don't have to recreate the wheel, guys. Like, if this works for Connecticut, it should work for us with some minor tweaks here and there. But maybe with no tweaks, wouldn't it be awesome if we had the same T's and C's across the entire nation for this stuff?
That's a fantastic resource. I'd love to get a copy of those. So
Sure.
we'll follow up afterwards. As we think about regulating in the privacy, data, AI, and all of these realms, I think the private sector, particularly some rules of the road would be engage. Your expertise is needed, your expertise is welcome and invited, and finding the right place to jump in can be a little difficult, but the option of not jumping in is the wrong one.
Yeah, I mean, sitting on the sidelines is never a way to get the job done. And it falls to those doers. So be one of those.
And on that note, that's a great note to leave on.